Thank you. Thank you. Hassan.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. It's been quite inspiring listening to Nadia, Lily and AJ. And it's also quite a pleasure to be here. I understand that like many other Stop the Cuts committees across the city, there's been a lot of conversation about what to do next, how to actually approach the cuts now that they've been passed, the cuts at the provincial and the federal level, and the fact that with or without cuts, many in our communities don't already have access to livelihood or dignity. So hopefully many of the tactics that have been discussed today would help shape some of the ideas and analysis that, that hopefully will come out of this conversation in the months and weeks to come. I wanted to share two quick, hopefully, anecdotes, stories of how we've managed to work in certain situations. So the first is that my work primarily, and known as Illegal's work primarily, is with undocumented people and migrant workers. So living as somebody without any immigration papers in this city or in this country is very difficult. So we hear about how welfare rates are very low, but for most undocumented people, you can't access welfare. We hear about how food service provision is, inadequate, but we know that the Stop is actually one of the few rare food banks in the city where you don't have to produce ID to get access to food. It's the same with public housing. If you're an undocumented person, you can't get access to housing, trauma services, healthcare. I've had to go to the hospital in this city, and just to walk through the door, they asked me for $700 because I didn't have health coverage. And that's before they asked me what was wrong. So living like that and organizing with communities like that, we've had to, we do a number of things. So in terms of sort of the broad picture, in terms of our demands, we're obviously asking for a stop on all deportations. We say this because in a world where rich people can move freely, when money can change borders, it's only people who are poor, it's often people of color, who are actually being told that they can't live somewhere with dignity. There's about 200,000 undocumented people in the GTA. It's the largest concentration of undocumented people in the country, and this number is increasing at an exponential rate. Immigration policy has changed. Since Harper's come to power, refugee denials has gone up by 25%. Number of temporary workers has gone up. The number of citizenship rejections has doubled. So that means that more and more people are making the difficult decision to stay in this country without being able to access services. So as we're asking for all deportations to be stopped, as we're asking for immigration status to be given to all people, we also know that we need to change, material conditions, as has been said already, in the lives of our people immediately. So we call this work a sanctuary city. We're saying we want to build a city, Toronto, a city that is safe for all people. It's a city that's accessible to all people. Not just people with or without immigration status, but all people. And so our model that we've developed over the last 8 years goes something like this. I'm going to tell you about the first sort of real victory that happened out of this. In 2006, we received a phone call, actually OCAP received a phone call from students at Dante Alighieri High School, which is a local Catholic high school, and OCAP sent over the call to us. And it was some students in their class, and they said that immigration enforcement had walked in, they'd arrested a girl from a classroom, had dragged her brother out of the lunchroom and tossed her into a van and taken away, and the students didn't know what they could do or what they should do. So our organizers showed up, spoke with the students. There was a huge amount of anger, and so the next day we organized a demonstration outside the detention center where these children were jailed. So in case anyone has any questions, yes, Canada jails children, it always has. So we went outside, and 150 or so people actually showed up. So these were students, teachers, family members, neighbors, and they came together. And because of this pressure, and because of all the media cameras, the immigration detention center released them. So Kimberly and her brother Gerald, along with her father, her mom, her grandma, and her little baby sister, walk outside, and the a journalist shoves a camera and a mic into Kimberly's face and is like, what is this about? Why are you here? And Kimberly's never heard about any of us. And she says that, she's like, what I don't understand is why there are so many children inside there rather than being in school, right? And that sort of became a rallying call for much of our work. And so we tried to figure out how exactly one does that. How do you get undocumented children into schools? And so we decided to focus ourselves on the Toronto District School Board. Now, what most people don't know is actually that Kimberly and Jared were arrested out of the Toronto Catholic District School Board. We decided to focus on the Toronto District School Board because it's the largest school board in the country. And our idea was the same idea that people use when they say, oh, let's go after Nike or Starbucks. You pick the biggest bully or the biggest organization and hope that if you can push them over, others would follow. So we went to the Toronto District School Board and we asked them to pass this thing called the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which is that you don't ask for immigration status, and if you somehow find out someone's immigration status, you don't send it over to the federal authorities. So initially the school board said, well, we can't tell our principals or our teachers to break the law, that won't quite work, that doesn't work for us, and we persisted. So we organized classroom presentations, and through classroom presentations we would have rallies outside the school board. We would organize deputations, so we would go into the district school board meetings, and similarly we wouldn't leave. And so after a lot of this organizing, we realized we finally, the district school board trustees decided that they had to take this to a vote. This is about a year and a half of every sort of public campaign you can imagine. So we're standing outside the board room and we're waiting for people to walk in. And as each school board trustee walks in, we give them this sticker that says "Don't ask, don't tell," and we say, "Stick it on if you're going to actually agree to the policy." And so when they walked in, we saw that not a lot of them had these stickers on, and we had no speaking rights in this meeting. So basically, what we would do is we would clap if somebody spoke in favor, we would boo if somebody said in against. And a lot of media didn't show up. So a bunch of people took out their cameras, and this is like now everyone has a camera all the time, but they couldn't differentiate between media and non-media. So, and these school board trustees obviously have a lot of political ambitions, and they didn't want to come off as being anti-immigrant because they want immigrant votes later for whatever political aspirations they have, say town councillor, provincial, etc. And so in this meeting, what happened was, after a year and a half of organizing, is that the school board actually voted that not only would it not ask or tell, it would also ban immigration enforcement from entering all Toronto district schools, and thus declaring them a sanctuary zone. So when this happened, obviously we were delighted, but we also knew that policies aren't actually worth the paper they're written on. And so as soon as that happened, we went back into schools and started, and because the cameras turned off, and there was victory and there was no longer public pressure. And what happened was, when we stepped out of it and realized that though the policy had passed, the admissions forms were still being said the same thing, and administrators at the front end were refusing to abide by the policy, or in fact didn't even know the policy, right? So since 2006 now, we've been organizing in schools, and so we've taken a series of measures. So we made a documentary about this, and we started showing it in all the schools, and we'd show it in a school, and then students would sort of get motivated to go to their front school staff and ask for the admissions forms, or go to the office and ask for changes. So much so that in order to sort of like get us to stop, the Toronto District School Board issued these posters now that are supposed to be outside all of the different front offices. And so the second layer of what that happened is that there have been now organizations. So there's the Parkdale Community Legal Clinic, Justice for Youth and Children. There are other organizations that are well-resourced that have stepped up and then started taking on the work of advocacy, because we've managed to push at the front end and create a safe space. So we took that work and we said, okay, what are our failings? What have we learned from it? We learned that a policy that's just passed at the board level is going to be extremely hard to implement. We actually need to create something from the ground up. So for the next round of the fight, so the project is basically, first we went into schools. Okay, so then we said, okay, where are we going to go next? So then we went into anti-VAW agencies, anti-violence against women agencies. we went into anti-violence against women agencies because, again, undocumented women survivors of violence were being in shelters and trauma shelters and anti-violence against women shelters. And immigration enforcement was literally coming in the middle of the night, grabbing them and their children and kidnapping them and trying to deport them. And so we began this process. And so we began this process by beginning to do conversation circles and workshops in 8 of the 12 anti-VAW shelters in the GTA. And we went in and we started holding meetings with undocumented women as well as other women in the shelter. And in the conversation, we asked, what do you need from the shelter? So it no longer just became about access to services, right? Just for undocumented women, but just in general, what that shelter system could do for the women who are already inside. And what happened was basically these sort of cells or these groups became really, really active and started asking for a whole set of demands and actually asserting that we need, that in different spaces, that they wanted more control over decision making in the places they were living, right? And so when that happened, the shelter executives, these are all, also women, these are all people who are in this sector and are sort of on our side, supposedly banned our organization from going inside them, all right? And so we were faced with this dilemma where we were like, okay, we were trying to build a base, it hadn't fully worked, but we had our marching orders, so to speak. And so we took that and we said, okay, if we can't work inside shelters, we changed our tactic, and we went after the Canada Border Services Agency, which is the immigration thugs. That's what we call them. And we went to their office and we started with a delegation, and then we forced meetings with them. We organized repeated occupations of their offices until eventually the Greater Toronto Enforcement Centre in the GTA passed a policy saying that it would neither enter nor wait outside nor call any anti-VAW space. So that meant a school, a university that had a women's drop-in center. They would not call any of them to try and arrest undocumented or trans people or their families, right? So this was obviously, a massive amount of success, and it happened because they could see that even though we did, because we built this support and this power. So this happened in November of 2010. In February of 2011, because we're dealing with this federal government, and it's always this back and forth, the federal government came back and reneged on the CBSA policy, right? Well, what we had done in this period is that even though they changed the law again to allow them to go back inside, they realized that they didn't actually have the power to do so, because we'd created amongst staff, amongst residents, amongst feminist activists in the city, this belief that because these laws were not working for us, they could not be implemented. And so CBSA said, okay, we will do all of these things as long as we get permission from these anti-VAW agencies to do so, right? And so since then, our work has begun about empowering people, right, to ensure that they don't allow these arrests and detentions and deportations to take place. And so the purpose of, and after we've done that, so again, we were like, okay, we've done schools, we've done anti-VAW agencies. Our next work right now is actually in food banks, and we're talking to the Daily Bread Food Bank, and we're trying to get them to pass a policy to make sure that all food banks in the city are accessible to undocumented people. And so our project works something like this, to briefly summarize. We have to fight the battle at all fronts, right? We're trying to change policies. We're trying to build people power. But what we're specifically trying to do is we're trying to give this sense that it does not matter what laws are. It does not matter what policies are. Because the people we work with are considered illegal, right? Their very existence is criminalized. So we can't actually wait for a shift, so to speak, or the right politicians to come into power. Yeah. We need to give people, we need to tell frontline service providers that every time you ask for ID, you in effect become an immigration officer, and you need to change yourself. At the same time, we need to get undocumented people to be able to assert their power. We need to get allies to work with communities and actually create meaningful change. And our hope is that, we're going to, once we've gone through food banks, then we're going to go into health centers, then we're going to go into housing, and we're going to do this service by service, site by site, business by business, home by home, until eventually we will be able to create a city where immigration enforcement cannot work, where the police cannot do the work of immigration enforcement, where Canadian immigration policies, no matter what they are federally developed to be, cannot be enforced on people. And I think that what this means for us is to say that we're living in a day and age where it doesn't matter whether you have Miller or Ford, or you've got whatever premier or whatever prime minister. People have power, and we can change it. And we've shown now that we can change it. I think a lot of our stories today are about that. So I hope that these ideas and tactics are useful, that we can talk more specifically about what it would look like in this neighborhood. I would specifically say that in any work that is supposed to be in a community, it needs to come, as was said already, from the grassroots up. There needs to be conversations in this community to talk about what it is that people need changed. And once that's been identified, then people need to be, we need to create the tools for ourselves to be able to go to the wall with it. And that means that if they shut down one more school in this neighborhood, we should be able to keep it open. If they shut down a health center, we should be able to pry its doors open and be able to run it. And eventually, over time, the laws will adjust to us. And they always do. People create change. The laws follow. Thank you.